Hold your water.
Okay.
Is anybody not ready? All right, great, let's do it.
Well, good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with my colleague from Texas, Senator Cruz, Senator Ricketts from the great state of Nebraska, Senator Lee from the great state of Utah, Senator Barrasso from Wyoming was here with us but had to leave just a few moments ago. We've had another great visit here in the Valley. The main reason Senator Cruz and I invite our colleagues to come here is because of the complexity, shall we say, of what's going on here. But first, before I talk a little bit about what we saw and what we all learned, I just want to honor San Benito police officer Lieutenant Milton Resendez, who was killed in the line of duty this week. Our prayers, of course, are with his family and his brothers and sisters in blue as they mourn his tragic loss. It's no news to anybody that the Biden administration has seen historic levels of irregular or illegal mass migration across the southern border. And you might ask, what's changed? Well, a number of things have changed. Historically, immigration was poor people coming from Mexico, Central America that wanted to work in the United States. Today, people are traveling literally from around the world and showing up at the ports of entry and claiming asylum, or because of the sheer volume of people coming across, the Biden administration is simply releasing them into the interior of the United States without any real consequences. If you listen to the Border Patrol, what they tell you is there's no consequences, which is another way of saying there's no deterrent for people not to come or to come only through regular legal channels. I believe, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree with me, legal immigration has been a blessing to our country, truly has. Illegal immigration is a disaster because the Biden administration is outsourcing immigration to drug cartels, transnational criminal organizations who care nothing about the people. All they care about is the money. And we saw the Brooks County Sheriff was showing us pictures of bleached bones and human remains of migrants who have been left behind in Brooks County as they tried to circumvent the Falfurrias checkpoint. This is a disaster. It's a humanitarian disaster. It is a public safety disaster. Before I hand it over to Senator Cruz, let me just point out two other things. We focus a lot on the migrants who've come across, and certainly there have been millions, as many maybe as 7 million, including 1.5 million gotaways trying to evade law enforcement. But there's not enough attention to being paid to the 108,000 Americans who lost their lives last year as a result of drugs coming across the border, including 71,000 from fentanyl alone. As you will hear from my colleagues, fentanyl is the leading cause of death of 18 to 45-year-olds in the United States. The leading cause of death from a drug that is manufactured, in essence, in Mexico and smuggled across the border into the interior. And then there's the 300,000 children who've been lost by the Biden administration. The New York Times alone has documented that as many as 85,000 phone calls were made to sponsors of these unaccompanied children, only to go unanswered 30 days after they've been placed with the sponsor. They can't tell you whether they're going to school, whether they're getting the health care that they need, whether they're being abused, neglected, trafficked for sex, forced into involuntary labor. They can't tell you. And the truth is they don't care. Because if they did care, they would do something about it. So, you know, the Rio Grande Valley is one of my favorite places to come. I'm sure Senator Cruz feels the same way. This is a vibrant part of our state. It's unique, and there's another reason why I love to have our colleagues come. They've learned a lot about the importance of binational trade between Mexico and the United States and how many jobs that creates here in America and in Mexico as well. And so we have something special here, but unfortunately it's being spoiled by the Biden administration's reckless policies that do nothing to deter illegal immigration and facilitate, frankly, the death of 108,000 Americans last year alone and hundreds of thousands of lost children lost to sponsors in the interior of the United States with unknown outcomes. With that, let me turn it over to Senator Cruz.
Thank you. It is great to be back in the Rio Grande Valley. South Texas is an extraordinary place, and South Texas is paying the price for the disaster of the open borders under the Biden administration. For the past decade, John Cornyn and I have repeatedly brought our colleagues from the Senate down to South Texas to the Rio Grande Valley to see firsthand what's happening. Because you cannot understand what is unfolding, particularly over these last 3 years, without seeing it with your own eyes. On this trip, we came down with 5 senators all together. We started the trip by going to the Border Patrol station and joining their midnight muster. And we took the opportunity to stand in front of the men and women of this sector in the Border Patrol and say thank you. Thank you for the heroes that risk their lives every day trying to keep this country safe. And I gotta say, for the men and women of the Border Patrol to have their job frustrated and made impossible by the political leadership of this administration, by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Alejandro Mayorkas, is utterly disgraceful. The men and women of the Border Patrol are frustrated. They're deeply frustrated because they risk their lives apprehending people only to turn around and see them let go over and over and over again. After that, we went out on midnight patrol with the agents. Some months ago, Karine Jean-Pierre stood at the White House podium and said, people are not just walking across the border. It's simply not happening. Everyone here today knows that was a lie. She was lying on behalf of the President of the United States in the White House with the President's seal in front of her. My response at the time, I said, Karine, come to the border anytime. Come out with me, and I guarantee you within an hour, we will encounter a group. Well, last night, within the hour, we encountered a group. It's about 20 people. They had voluntarily turned themselves in, as many do in the Rio Grande Valley. They were predominantly women and children. And we spent about 40 minutes talking to that group. There was one little girl who's 13 years old. She had no family with her. She was unaccompanied. There was another little girl who was 16 years old. She had no family with her. There was a little boy who was 15 years old. He had no family with him. We asked them about the violence they'd faced on the travel over. The look in those kids' faces was horrifying. For me, the most disturbing part of the conversation was a little girl in the back of the group who was 10 years old. And she had a man who said he was her father with his arm draped forcefully around her. And it was obvious to anyone who's ever seen a father and daughter that these two were not related. At one point, when we asked about her mother, we saw her look to the man who was claiming to be her dad, wondering what's the answer supposed to be. During the Trump administration, they were regularly DNA testing kids who were with adult men. And upwards of 30% of them were not related to the adult men. One of the first things Joe Biden did was end the DNA testing. Because apparently Democrats don't care if that 10-year-old girl is related to the adult man that the cartel handed her over to. There was also a couple that we met from Moldova. A husband and wife and a little 2 or 3-year-old girl. The little girl was precious. But what these people had been through, the abuse that they had endured at the hands of human traffickers, you could see the pain on their faces. We asked the unaccompanied minors, where are you going to stay? And one after the other, they said, I'm going to stay with my tío, my uncle. Apparently, there are a lot of tíos in America. And yet the 13-year-old told us her tío didn't know she was coming. And I got to say, it was horrifying as we left them, knowing there's a very good chance those teenage girls are being taken off to be sex trafficked, to be trapped in forced prostitution, as is happening to thousands and thousands of teenage girls. When we were on the border, we also saw a colored wristband. Some of you may remember I asked Alejandro Mayorkas about those colored wristbands, and he told us he had no idea what they are, which was truly stunning because almost every illegal immigrant wears one, and they're color-coded for how many thousands of dollars they owe the cartels. You can find them littering the grass by the Rio Grande River, and yet the man allegedly in charge of securing the border hasn't bothered to talk to the Border Patrol agents, hasn't bothered to go to the border and see the children being abused because of these open borders. This is a humanitarian crisis. South Texas sees the thousands of children abused, sees the thousands of women sexually abused, sees the dead bodies. We saw pictures, picture after picture after picture. 853 people died last year crossing illegally into this country. And with the war that is unfolding in Israel, the risk of terrorism in the United States, I believe today, is greater than it has been at any point since 9/11. Border Patrol has sent written guidance to Border Patrol agents: be on guard for Hamas and Hezbollah seeking to enter the country and carry out the same atrocities they're carried out in Israel. I have a simple message for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and every Democrat senator. Come to the border. Come to the Rio Grande Valley. Come out on midnight patrol and look in the eyes of the little children who are suffering from these inhumane policies. This is horrific. This is wrong. And the people of South Texas know this is an utter disaster.
I want to thank Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz and their respective offices and staffs for organizing this event and hosting us. I also thank the Border Patrol, the CBP, local law enforcement, local mayors, and local interested citizens who have educated and informed us on this trip. With exactly one exception, the United States Constitution does not regulate individual behavior. It regulates the conduct of government. It distributes power within the government. It restrains and restricts the activities of government in the United States. But there is one exception. It is found in the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which prohibits slavery, involuntary servitude, and indentured servitude. Until last night, I believed that these things, for the most part, have been relegated to the history books in the United States of America since the adoption of the 13th Amendment. But last night I heard the term indentured servitude used as something describing a going concern in the United States of America, describing those who have been brought on this harsh journey from other places in Central and South America, where people are paying thousands and thousands of dollars per head, money that in many cases they don't have, at least not up front. And then they're required to repay it along the journey and after they arrive. Some of them for months or perhaps years after they arrive. This, of course, is unlawful. It's even unconstitutional. And yet it's happening. It's happening because the Biden administration refuses to enforce laws on the books. Make no mistake. There is no new law that would have to be passed to bring this under control. Existing authorities, existing statutes allow the administration to enforce the border, to reinstate the Remain in Mexico program, but this administration refuses to do so. And by so doing, it further electrifies and empowers the electromagnet, as it were, bringing people into this country unlawfully. Not only is this enriching multinational drug cartels to the tune of many billions and billions of dollars a year, not only is this destabilizing the rule of law in America, but it is subjecting an entire class of individuals now entering our borders, millions of them, something like 8 million of them that have come in just in the last 3 years alone, to humanitarian conditions that are abhorrent. A substantial majority of the women and girls brought up through this process are sexually assaulted along the way, and many of them are forced into the sex trade and sometimes remain in the sex trade for a substantial period of time even after they arrive. in order to pay off those debts. This is slavery. This is involuntary servitude. This is indentured servitude. And we can't let it happen. This administration has much to answer for. Look, there's no better time than right now to reverse course. They can do it, and they should, and they must. So I have a message for those in other parts of the world, particularly those in the Western Hemisphere who are thinking about making this dangerous journey. We're sending family members on this dangerous journey. Don't do it. Don't come. Don't send your daughters. Don't send your wives, your sisters on this journey because it's too perilous for them. Don't do it. If you love them, do not allow them to do it. Por favor, no manden a sus esposas, hermanas e hijas por esta jornada horrífica para ser abusadas sexualmente por los coyotes y los carteles. Escuchamos cuento tras cuento de traficantes secuestrando a las mujeres y niños aún mucho tiempo después de cruzar la frontera. En el 2019, el New York Times documentó decenas de encuentros de estas mujeres. Este es solo de uno de estos cuentos, de una madre de 3 hijos de Guatemala. Ella dice, por muchas semanas los hombres que ella pagó para traerle segura a los Estados Unidos le drogaron con pastillas y cocaína. No le permitieron salir ni para bañarse. Ella dijo, creo que desde que me pusieron en este cuarto, me mataron. Nos violaron tantas veces que dejaron de vernos como seres humanos. Estas mujeres y niñas, sí son seres humanas. Debemos de respetarlas. Tenemos que protegerlas. Es algo que no podemos aceptar. No aquí, en este país. No hoy, nunca.
Well, again, I want to add my thanks to Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz for hosting us to this visit on the southern border, and also the men and women of the Customs and Border Protection for not only hosting us, but for their heroic work to stem this overwhelming tide of people that is coming into our country. Last month, a record over 260,000 contacts by Customs and Border Patrol. It was mentioned in this Biden administration, 8 million. To put that in context, that's more than the previous 2 administrations combined. That's how many people are coming here. We've also seen, again, another record year of people on the terrorist watch list, over 170 coming to this country. Last year was 98. Put that in perspective. A few years ago, that was single digits. And why is this happening? Because of Joe Biden's open border policy. This humanitarian and security crisis falls squarely on Joe Biden. It is his policies that is sending a message for all these people coming here to undertake this very dangerous journey. We heard about over 800 people dying in the last year. Over 2,300 since Joe Biden has taken office. That's what Customs and Border Patrol tells us is going on down here. Senator Cornyn mentioned the leading cause of death among young people in our country, ages 18 to 45, is drug overdose, fentanyl. It's coming from here. And last night you heard the stories from Senator Cruz, very real human stories that we saw with our own eyes. Right across the border, right across this river, we saw the people who had just come here and heard their stories. They are suffering to get here, and they will continue to suffer as the cartels continue to traffic them. As my colleague said, this is a modern form of slavery, and it is allowed to go on because of Joe Biden. It is that simple. When we talk to the Customs and Border Patrol folks, you know what they say? the first thing they say is change the policy. Change the policy so we don't send that message so many people aren't coming here. They're spending more time processing people than actually guarding the border. This must end. This must end. And it will only end when this administration takes responsibility, when Joe Biden takes responsibility for the human suffering he is causing right here in our own country, and change these policies so that we don't have this crisis. Thank you very much. With that, I'll turn it back over to Senator Cornyn.
We'll take a few questions.
Senator Cornyn, this question is from Stacey Forbes, who ran the border for Homeland Security during the Trump administration. In the past, Stacey writes, CBP had a pilot project that installed low-watt AM radio station frequencies at 6 locations on the southwest border. 2 in El Paso, Brownsville, Laredo, San Luis, and Calixa, California, to communicate important, legitimate border-crossing information to members of the traveling public. Based on the critical situation that you gentlemen are seeing here today, do you agree with Stacey Forbes that it would be useful for the Border Patrol to utilize local radio stations to broadcast humanitarian warnings to migrants such as do not use smugglers, cross at ports of entry, if you get lost, dial 911, and use these stations to broadcast Se Busca Información campaign messaging and photos targeting the smuggling organizations, Senator Cruz? Question. Would you 5 senators support a public-private partnership between DHS, University of Texas, and Texas A&M to implement this radio station initiative?
Well, Ron, it sounds to me like that would be a constructive step. The challenge we have is that occasionally the Biden administration will go to Mexico or Central America and say, don't come. We saw the mayor of New York City go to Mexico City, say, don't come. But these folks are smart, and they realize, they watch TV, and they see people coming to the border being released in the interior. They have relatives that make their way into the interior, call them up and said, I made it, you can too. So, yeah, I'm for all sorts of humanitarian measures, things like the rescue beacons we saw around the Falfurrias checkpoint, where if people are in distress, they can call for help. You know, the #1 language listed on that is Chinese, Mandarin, and which shocked me when I saw it. But this is not a localized or regional phenomenon, as you heard. People are literally coming from around the world and saying the magic words. And because the Biden administration doesn't detain people while they determine their legal status, something called catch and release, which we've heard from our friends of the Border Patrol Council, is maybe the single most important thing we could do, is to reestablish or eliminate catch and release so that people can get their claims decided on the front early and send a message that if you don't qualify, which 90% of them do not qualify for asylum, then they will not come. So the Border Patrol will tell you that it's about consequences. And I asked, is that another word for deterrence? And they said, yes, it's roughly the same thing. But the message, you know, it's one thing to say something. It's another thing, you know, whether your actions match your words. And all of the actions of the Biden administration is keep on coming. And they are apparently receiving that message, as Senator Ricketts said, I think 260,000 roughly last month alone. And we've already talked about the millions that are coming. This is a disaster, and we need to try to help people where we can, but we need to send an unequivocal message by not only our words, but by our actions, that people should not circumvent the legal pathways into the country.
Senator Cornyn, if Senator Cruz's PANA Act passes, would that in any way alleviate the immigration issue with the numbers drop in any way?
Look, the only way to alleviate the numbers is to end catch and release. If you look at what Joe Biden inherited, he came into office with the lowest rate of illegal immigration in 45 years. Right now, one of the talking points of the White House is this problem can't be solved. That talking point simply is not correct. What caused this crisis was a decision that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris made literally the first week in office. They halted construction of the border wall. They reinstated catch and release. And they pulled out of the incredibly successful Remain in Mexico policy. Those decisions caused this crisis. Last night, when we encountered the group, we asked them, how many of y'all believe you get to stay in America? Every one of them said, absolutely, we get to stay. As long as that's the case, they will keep coming. And understand, Joe Biden doesn't want to fix this problem. He doesn't want to secure the border. Kamala Harris doesn't want to secure the border. Chuck Schumer doesn't want to secure the border. Alejandro Mayorkas doesn't want to secure the border. Here's what they want to do. They want to speed up the processing of illegal immigrants. They want to make it even faster. They want more illegal immigration. They want 8 million to become 10 million, to become 15, to become 20 million. To understand the enormous hypocrisy on this issue, look no further than the blue state governors and the blue state mayors who are declaring crises. Look at Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, who has said illegal immigration is a crisis and illegal immigration is destroying New York City. And New York City has had roughly 110,000 illegal immigrants. I don't disagree with Mayor Adams on that. But the last I checked, New York City is a hell of a lot bigger than McAllen, Texas. Just in the Rio Grande Valley sector, Border Patrol agents have detained over 1 million illegal immigrants in the last 2.5 years. If 110,000 is destroying a giant metropolis like New York, what about the devastation here in South Texas? Understand, this is deliberate. They're not trying to stop it. They want more of this. And I got to say, the absolute lack of compassion from this administration. I asked Alejandro Mayorkas, I said last year, how many migrants died crossing illegally into this country? He said, I don't know, I have no idea. The answer is 853. But the Biden administration can't be bothered to worry about the body bags that are piling up. We've introduced lots of legislative steps that can all make a difference, but none of it will work. Zero will work. As long as you have a president of the United States who defies the law, who simply says, if you come to this country, we will let you go. That's what's caused this crisis. And I'll point out, by the way, Mayor Adams blames, quote, that madman in Texas, by which I'm pretty sure he meant Greg Abbott, although I have to say I was offended he wasn't talking about me. Because Greg Abbott has sent 10 to 20,000 illegal immigrants by bus to New York City. The rest of them were sent by Joe Biden, and even the Democrat governors and mayors, they can't bring themselves to point out the person who caused this crisis is named Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. And by the way, a fellow New Yorker, Charles Schumer, and every Democrat senator is completely complicit in it. And if Mayor Adams doesn't know Chuck Schumer's cell phone, we'd be glad to give it to him. Because Senate Democrats could force Biden to stop this, but they don't want to. And that is profoundly inhumane.
Senators, did you guys notice any dent at Border Patrol? Did Border Patrol tell you guys that they saw a dent with the flights to Venezuela as of recent? What have they told you guys?
Well, the problem is that in the RGV, the Border Patrol sector here is doing a heroic job under impossible circumstances. But it's like being out on a boat in this river, and you've got a teacup, and your boat's sinking because the water's flooding in, but you're trying to bail the water out. Those flights that are going back to these countries like Venezuela are just like that teacup. They can't possibly keep up with the flow of people coming into across the border from 4 countries alone, including Colombia, Cuba, Venezuela, and I think it's maybe Honduras or El Salvador. President Biden has said, you show up at our border, we'll let 30,000 of you in, and basically you don't need to claim asylum, you don't need to prove anything. That's 360,000 people a year. So again, this administration, I used to think they were just incompetent. But nobody is this incompetent. Nobody watches the consequences of their policies like this, and you can't claim incompetence anymore. This must be willful or intentional. And sadly, as several of us have said, there's not a whole lot the legislative branch can do to force the executive branch, who's charged with enforcing the law, to actually enforce laws on the book. You've heard from several of my colleagues here. There's laws in the book that would allow President Biden to enforce the law now and to deal with this and to deter this influx of humanity, but he won't do it. So I'm afraid the only thing that's going to change this outcome, unless something else happens, is an election in 2024 where we get a new president who will actually enforce the laws that are on the books.
Guys, we have time for one last question.
Senator Ricketts, do you think people in more northern states fully understand what the scene is like here on the Texas-Mexico border, and if not, why?
Well, one of the reasons I'm here is to be able to help communicate what's going on exactly at the southern border. But trust me, people in Nebraska understand the crisis that's going on down here because we're impacted by it too. If you look at the drugs that are coming into our state, we see it. Taryn Lee Griffith was a young mom with 2 kids who took a drug she thought was Percocet and died of a fentanyl overdose. And now those 2 little girls are going to have to learn about their mom through pictures and family stories. Taryn Lee Griffith was a young woman that lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, not here in Texas. So we feel what is going on in Nebraska, and that's why, as governor, I said we're all border states, and I say that to this day because we are seeing the impact in Nebraska, and that's why I'm here today.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.